Hi, I'm Doug Horchak, and you're listening to Verse by Verse. Today we're going to read about some incredible, and to many people unbelievable, changes that will take place on earth in the future. Let's begin by reading these words from the book of Acts, chapter 3, verse 21. Whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. What is being talked about here, and what is it that's going to be restored? We'll answer that question, but first let's consider the backstory. The text of Acts 3:21 is actually the Apostle Peter speaking. He's preaching to a large group of people at the temple in Jerusalem that were amazed when Peter healed a man that was lame, a person that was unable to walk since birth. The crowd had experienced a miracle, and they were astonished. However, in his message, Peter admonished this group of people to realize that it was God, not Peter or the apostles, that actually healed this lame man, and that these people were guilty of rejecting the Messiah, the Son of God, during his earthly ministry and needed to repent and change. So in verse 21, Peter was referring to Jesus being in heaven until a specific point in time in the future, what he referred to as the times of restoration of all things. But when would that occur? The time in the future that Peter was referring to was the end of this age, a time defined by the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. But what is meant by this restoration he refers to? Dictionaries define restoration as, quote, a return to a former, original, normal, or unimpaired condition, or the restitution of something taken away or lost, end quote. So what was Peter saying about what would be restored? Well, the Bible tells us that virtually everything would be restored to its original state as God designed and intended. The Apostle Paul describes this extraordinary event in the future of God's plan in Romans chapter 8, where he wrote, quote, for the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation, referring to the entire physical creation, was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption, in other words, from decay and destruction, into the glorious liberty of the children of God. Wow! The entire creation being rescued from the grips of decay and corruption. But what did the prophets of God tell us of this time that Peter refers to in Acts 3? In the words of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 35, we find that God says that in the future, the wilderness and deserts of the earth will blossom as a beautiful flower, that the blind people will have their sight restored and will see again, and that the lame, those who cannot walk, will now leap like a deer. We also read in Isaiah chapter 2 that God's way of life will be taught, and that increasing numbers of people from around the world will come to Jerusalem to be taught the way of God, instructed in the law of God and its application to life. And later in that very chapter we read the famous words, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. What an encouraging statement. The way of peace that has eluded mankind for millennia will be restored, no longer using war as a means to resolve the conflicts that humans have brought upon themselves. Isaiah's prophecy tells us a lot. Both Isaiah and the prophet Amos reveal that during this time of restoration in the future, people will eventually work together and pitch in to rebuild the waste places and ruins caused by Satan's influence on mankind. A time in the future, that wonderful world tomorrow, that all of God's servants have looked forward to since creation. A time when all that God had created, that he described as very good, will be restored, returned to the way God intended. As we read these words of Peter in Acts chapter 3, we understand that the restoration of all things includes changes to the earth, the way earth is governed, and the relationship God will have with all humanity. At the end of this age, at the return of Christ, God intends to restore an environment and a new world where peace, justice, happiness, and abundance will finally be possible. What a wonderful day that will be.
Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.